What are the 9 things you can no longer do on a cruise? I'm Gary Bembridge, and this is another of my tips for travelers. I've been on over 66 cruises, and I try and pack all the learning that I've got from all of those cruises into every single video I make about cruising. So what are the things you used to be able to do on a cruise that you can no longer? First of all, you can no longer smoke or vape in your cabin, around the ship, in the dining room, and even on your balcony. Way back in the good old days, you were able to smoke everywhere on the ship, and then slowly but surely that has become less and less and less until pretty much every single cruise ship that I'm aware of, you're not even allowed to smoke or vape on your balcony any longer. They have very specific areas on the ship and increasingly fewer and fewer parts of the ship where you can actually smoke or vape. And on most cruise ships, the rules for vaping is the same as the rules for actual cigarette smoking. Some ships will also have very specific smoking rooms or bars. So for example, on Princess, they have Churchill's Club, and on some cruise lines, they still have smoking either on some nights or on all nights in the casino, although that's slowly being phased out. So certainly as a smoker, it's a real challenge, and a really good friend of ours who's a smoker is really questioning going cruising because they are finding it really restrictive on where they can smoke. Secondly, with the clampdown and increase in security, you're no longer able to, on pretty much every single cruise line, bring guests on board. In the grand old days of the liners, people would come on board with their friends and family, have a look at the cabin, they'd have a wander around the ship, and there'd be an announcement made, and people would then leave the ship before it sailed. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to get on a ship, even if you go on a ship tour. So for example, I go on various tours on ships, and it's quite a big deal. You have to send your passport details in advance. It's really strictly controlled. So having friends and families and having guests on board is pretty much now impossible on any single cruise line. In the good old days, you could bring friends on board in a port. You could perhaps bring them on board for lunch to have a look around the ship. This is no longer possible. The third thing that you can no longer do on a cruise, and one that's a real pity, is have the big streamer sail away. Even as recently as the 70s and into the 80s, when you sailed away, you were given streamers and you could throw them. And if you go back and look at some of the old classic liner photographs, you'll see as they sailed away, throwing streamers over the side of the ship was a really big part of the cruising tradition. Of course, as there's much more awareness around the environment, things like throwing streamers over the side of the ship was seen as a really bad thing. So all of that has stopped. So the big streamer sail away has gone. The fourth one is really linked to that, and you are no longer able to throw anything overboard. And it's one of the things that you will hear in the safety briefing and the welcome briefing is you cannot throw anything overboard. Not being able to throw things overboard has meant that some traditions like the message in a bottle have also disappeared. So it used to be a relatively popular activity where people would get bottles, they put their name and address, a little message in, and they'd throw them overboard and hope that the currents would take them somewhere and they would hear from people. Throwing things into the ocean is really frowned upon, which leads on to the next thing, which is there used to actually be various sports and activities that you would do on a cruise ship which did involve you hitting things overboard. So you used to practice golf, for example, putting into the sea. Some ships used to have clay pigeon shooting. There used to be a whole set of games that you would play which involved hitting things off the ship into the ocean. Very interesting recent development on things you can no longer do on certain cruise lines is shake hands. So for example, the cruise lines or perhaps the individual captains are asking that you do not shake hands, and the crew themselves will refuse to shake hands. So some of them might do a fist bump, or some of them basically a nod. And the reason for that is one of the easiest ways to spread the norovirus is through touch. So you touch, you end up touch your mouth and you ingest it. So a lot of the cruise lines are moving towards not shaking hands and encouraging you as passengers not to shake hands. So certainly shaking hands may increasingly become something that you just don't do on a cruise anymore. Visiting the bridge and an open bridge used to be a really common part of cruising, so it was very easy to get access to the bridge. Some cruise lines will not have any access to the bridge, so there are no bridge tours. Some cruise lines will allow access to the bridge in a very controlled manner, and normally through a paid activities. So they will run behind the scene tours which will include a short visit to the bridge. So very few people actually get onto the bridge at all. And then some will only have very selected guests which they might invite, so people who've perhaps been cruising for a very long time, perhaps a VIP. Now, on some of the smaller cruise lines, or perhaps you've got on a river cruise line, they do still have an open bridge policy where you're able to go in pretty easily and frequently. So getting access to the bridge and being able to visit the bridge and tour the bridge is increasingly becoming something that you used to be able to do very easy on a cruise and becoming less and less easy to do. I think one of the most interesting things that you can't do on a cruise that you used to be able to do is completely switch off. Up until not even that long ago, Wi-Fi connectivity was pretty difficult and very, very expensive. So if you went on a cruise, particularly one with lots of sea days, you were able to really disconnect and switch off. However, really driven by demand, particularly of younger cruisers and people just being more connected, the cruise lines are constantly improving and increasing the speed, the access, and the price of being connected on Wi-Fi. And it's now quite easy on many cruise lines to be connected completely unlimited Wi-Fi for relatively reasonable amounts of money. And more cruise lines, particularly at the premium end, are also including Wi-Fi within the fare, so you can be connected all the time within your fare. Not that long ago, you were able to just switch off, you'd switch your phone off and you were going to get emails, you weren't going to be connected, and you really could switch off on a cruise. So disconnecting is something you used to be able to do on a cruise, much less so now. You also used to be able to socialize with the crew much more. There was much more mingling and parties and interaction between the crew and the passengers. This is almost forbidden nowadays, so there will be certain opportunities to socialize with the crew. Some of the senior crew might invite you or host tables on some of the cruises. The cruise lines are becoming more and more strict on those interactions with the crew. So if you go back and look at the old liner days, you'll find there was lots of cocktail parties, there's more mixing and socializing between the crew. The cruise lines have much stricter rules. So for example, even if you strike up a friendship with perhaps the gym instructor or other people, even meeting on land is frowned on. So for example, we became very friendly when we were on a big stretch of a world cruise with some of the people in the spa. And we said, why don't we meet to perhaps go out and do some stuff on land? And they were like, we can't really do that because the rules really say that we can't fraternize and mix with passengers. And I guess that sort of makes sense. But certainly you used to be able to mix with the crew much more. Now it is kept much more at arm's length. If you can think of anything else that you used to be able to do on a cruise but can no longer do on a cruise, I'd love to hear what those are, anything that I've missed. Why not watch many more of my Tips for Travelers videos? They're packed full of advice and tips to help you make the most of your precious travel time and money on land, on sea, and on the rivers of the world.